Without further ado, this is Miranda on tempered professional advocacy.
Well, hi everybody. Thank you very much for coming. I am currently a senior in the philosophy department, and I joined the department 3 years ago after taking Intro to Philosophy with Dr. Rice. And as Chad also thanked the department, I would also like to thank the department for just a great experience. And thank you for all of the knowledge that you've given me, not just in the classroom, but just life knowledge. I feel like I've learned a lot about myself. And I'd also like to say a special thanks to Dr. Rice because he's been my advisor this whole time, and I'm sure I'm not always the easiest advisee.
You're always prepared.
I try. But thank you all very much for coming to my presentation. As he said, it's about tempered professorial advocacy, and my topic came about because I took Ethics of the Professions in Business last semester from Dr. Drapkin, and it sort of evolved from my term paper. In that term paper, I had asked, do educators at the college and university level have a responsibility to present multiple or alternative views on controversial topics to challenge the views of their students? And like I said, from this topic grew my senior thesis, and I chose this topic because I feel that it's really pertinent to the quality of education, because how a professor teaches students directly affects how students will, their abilities and their effectiveness as future professionals. So my thesis is that despite arguments against it, there should be and inevitably will be advocacy in the classroom, and to a certain degree, this is why I am arguing for tempered professorial advocacy, because for its appropriateness and its usefulness as a tool in higher education. To address this topic, we first need to examine professorial advocacy in general. And professorial advocacy is when a professor persuasively presents a view to their students on an issue applicable to current class material. For example, a professor in an oral communication course could be explaining different organizational patterns for speeches, and maybe when she reaches a specific pattern like the cause and effect pattern, she becomes very enthusiastic, and she says that this is the best pattern because, and maybe she'll say some reasons. She is making a claim to persuade her students and to persuade her students to believe that her view has validity. And so this is an example of professorial advocacy.
Yeah, I do have a clarification question here. When you and I was in the paper too, when you shifted from your initial question to your thesis,
Yes.
you don't mention controversial stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, you say, persuasively presenting views to students. You mean on controversial subjects?
Yes.
Okay, so that's understood. Yeah.
Thank you for saying that. I should have had that already. Okay. So.
Do you have something to drink?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm good.
No, I mean not that. I just meant Chad had brought his own water, and I asked whether you had water and or wanted water.
Thank you. Thank you. That was great. Okay, so what I am arguing for, this is professorial advocacy. What I am arguing for is a variation of this that is called tempered professorial advocacy. Like I said, this is a specific type of professorial advocacy, and what it is that it is, a professor charitably presents arguments in a class on a controversial topic, and then they will indicate which position they believe is the most sound or the most correct or the most well supported, and then they explain why they believe this position to be more supported over other positions. For example, imagine that a professor is lecturing on ways of interpreting the American Constitution. One such way is a strict constructionist view, and another way could be a loose constructionist view. And a tempered professorial advocate would present both of these major positions in the debate and then indicate which belief they think is the most sound. Maybe it would be the strict constructionist view, and then they would explain why. Although I'd like to make a point right now that although this type of teaching does involve advocacy, but like it involves content, like advocating for a specific point, that isn't the main goal of professorial advocacy. The main goal is to model disciplinary behavior. So speaking of goals, there are two goals to tempered professorial advocacy. There is a pedagogical goal, which a pedagogical goal is concerned with how the act of teaching occurs in the class, and as it applies to tempered professorial advocacy, the pedagogical goal is to model how to teach, how to reach conclusions for oneself in a particular discipline. A professor in a philosophy course uses critical thinking to evaluate arguments and arrive at a conclusion. Through tempered professorial advocacy, their behavior is displayed, and students can learn how to employ such behaviors for themselves. The second goal is an epistemic goal, which is concerned with knowledge. Then as it applies to tempered professorial advocacy, the epistemic goal is to disclose a particular type of knowledge to students. This is just, it is a goal, but it's more of a secondary goal. So tempered professorial advocacy allows students to witness how an expert considers information in a discipline, which is a pedagogical goal, and then to learn where the information may lead a reasonably educated person and why, which is how the epistemic goal ties in there. As for an example, I kind of skipped this, I guess, I'm sorry, take a breath, of the epistemic goal. Say you're taking a regional literature course, and that the professor of this course had maybe written their dissertation on this type of literature. They would likely have a type of expert knowledge then of this literature above what can be found in just a textbook or from reading the assignment. And by advocating for a particular interpretation of the literature, the students can be exposed to information that could prove crucial to developing an interpretive viewpoint. Given these goals, I think that it is important to take a moment to discuss the importance of student autonomy. Student autonomy is when a student has the intellectual freedom and maturity to consider arguments and choose independently of their professor's influence a stance in a debate. Why is this important? Regardless of deliberations about goals of higher education, most would agree that student autonomy is a key goal. Joel Kupperman, a professor of professional ethics, said that having what is sometimes called a card index mind is perhaps better than opinionated ignorance, but what we should hope is to produce students who have minds of their own, which are organized and receptive. What I think he's trying to get at here is that learning is more than memorizing information with or without any true understanding, but learning is about developing skills to come to an understanding and a conclusion in one's field of study. Without a student autonomy, a student will never truly have knowledge. They will just have this memorized database of information on a subject. So I think right now would be a good point to clarify what I'm specifically talking about. I am not talking about general education courses, and I'm not addressing questions of student learning styles. Tempered professorial advocacy wouldn't be inappropriate to use in general education courses because students are still developing their autonomy, and because they still haven't developed a base knowledge in their subject, they just do not have the intellectual maturity in that area to choose positions for themselves. Also, tempered professorial advocacy should not occur. It should not occur when they lack this intellectual maturity. And as for different learning styles, I'm not saying that this type of teaching would be effective for all students, but that it would be even effective. Like I said, it's not effective necessarily in general education courses. But I am saying that tempered professorial advocacy has an appropriate use in the classroom.
Just a clarification.
Yes.
So what would be appropriate teaching styles in the general education courses? The tempered advocacy, so just presenting facts?
Yeah, I would think so.
And even
But-
philosophy general education course?
I would say talking, like maybe in a philosophy general education course, you would talk about theories that are discussed, but you wouldn't necessarily give your specific position, or at least the professor wouldn't. Tempered professorial advocacy is appropriate in disciplinary courses. The reason for this is that it fulfills a pedagogical goal of education, which is to model how to reach a position in one's area of study. And also it is appropriate because student autonomy is more established in these specific, in these courses. Students are further along in their studies, and due to having learned some introductory knowledge, they are more mature in their academic career. And their maturity enables them to better understand and evaluate positions. Lastly, it is appropriate because it addresses and sort of eliminates the most glaring objections to professorial advocacy. So a couple objections to professorial advocacy. First, informed neutrality. Informed neutrality is a position from which professors can positively present positions within a debate in such a way as to make the position seem reasonable without picking a position to support themselves. This is typically seen as a way for a professor to seem objective and to sort of eliminate their bias in class discussion. If you consider, again, this idea of constitutional interpretation, a professor would present these views on how you can interpret it, but they would not say which position they believe to be more supported. Another objection to professorial advocacy is indoctrination. And indoctrination is when a professor's teaching leads students to believe a particular position. And this could occur intentionally or unintentionally, and it can occur with or without regard for alternative positions. For example, say a professor, I changed my example, I'm sorry, I didn't change my slide. Say a professor is discussing the gender gap in higher education and says that men receive more degrees in higher education than women. Until recently, this was the case, but recent studies have shown that women are now surpassing men on numbers of degrees earned in higher education. If a professor is discussing this in a class, they would likely, and they probably should, know about these recent updates in these statistics, for example, and this professor stating otherwise to what the new information says indoctrinates students into a false belief. These objections, both of these objections, while certainly concerning, can be eliminated by the use of tempered professorial advocacy. Okay, so informed neutrality is improper and an inadequate alternative to professorial advocacy. First, trying to be objective does not make a discussion neutral. Humans are inherently biased, and so there's really no way to be completely neutral. And also, not questioning some values in a debate is like accepting them. A philosopher, Kristen Schrader-Frechette, also argues against informed neutrality, and she says that most disturbing of all, to represent objectivity as neutrality is to sanction ethical relativism and therefore injustice. She uses an example in an essay talking about environmental advocacy, where she said that anthropologists from Columbia University during World War II had chosen to suspend judgment about the actions of the German government, the Nazis at the time, because they felt that they had a professional responsibility to remain neutral. And she makes a point that I completely agree with, that by choosing to remain neutral, these professors are in many ways condoning the unethical practices of the government at this time. And furthermore, informed neutrality ignores that positions in a debate are not necessarily equally defendable. For another example, take historical evidence about the Holocaust. A select number of historians and people in general try to defend the position that the Holocaust did not occur, and this position is not equally defendable to the position that the Holocaust genocide did occur, because there is a massive amount of historical evidence to support that it did. So presenting these two positions as equally defendable misrepresents the debate and misleads your students, students in general. So also, indoctrination is an inappropriate application of advocacy in the classroom. Temperate advocates would not try to force their students into a particular belief, which is what indoctrination really is forcing a student into a belief. A professor who is actually being a tempered advocate would not attempt to do this, and if they did, they wouldn't be practicing tempered professorial advocacy. The goal of tempered professorial advocacy is not fully or predominantly about actual content, is not about the actual content being advocated for. It's about modeling the thinking process and professional skills applied to reach a position. And because of this, most dangers of indoctrination can actually be avoided. Tempered professorial advocacy sort of addresses and eliminates both of these objections. So some key points in conclusion. Tempered professorial advocacy displays how students can hold a reasoned conclusion in a particular field regarding some controversial topic based on learning and evaluating information. It may disclose certain knowledge and expose students to views that they had never considered previously, like in the example that I used of the regional literature course. And tempered professorial advocacy avoids major objections to straightforward professorial advocacy, such as indoctrination and informed neutrality. So to summarize my position, tempered professorial advocacy fulfills pedagogical and epistemic goals of higher education and is both appropriate and useful, if not only unavoidable in the classroom. So, thank you. And I will take questions.
Question.
Can we go back to, do you know anything about this Columbia University anthropology case? Because I'm curious for some details. I'm wondering what the issue is. I'm imagining a bunch of these anthropologists sitting around, and someone's asking you, so what do you anthropologists think about whatever, the morality of what the Nazis are doing? And I'm imagining them sitting around saying, well, listen, if you want to know the morality, go to the philosophy department or the religion department. We're anthropologists. We're scientists. We'll tell you how it came about. We'll compare them to tribes in the South Pacific or whatever it is. But just the facts. That's what we do. If you want to ask us personally, we'll tell you on the side. But as anthropologists, we have nothing to say about the matter. I mean, I could imagine something like that going on. Did she take this up, this example? What do you know about it?
The impression that I was given was that that was actually sort of their response, that on a professional level that they couldn't. But from what I read, I thought that they were refusing to give a position at all, even just as human beings, saying that this is wrong or right. But I could look further into that if you wanted more of an answer.
How is tempered professorial advocacy different from Socratic dialogue?
Okay. I might need a little bit of time to think about that one. Socratic dialogue. Okay. I should know this. Could you
Well, I can
maybe
say what I think.
Yeah,
I
if you
people
could,
know much more about it.
that would be
Sitting right
great.
here. I believe that in Socratic dialogue, I believe the goal or the intended conclusion is present in the mind of the professor, and the professor asks questions and has students together with the professor entertaining different views, looking at, investigating different views in order for them eventually to arrive at the conclusion that the professor already had in mind. I'm probably completely wrong. I'm way over my head. But I just wonder what you're saying. I'm wondering how it's similar or different.
Okay, from what you're saying, I would think that from the way that sounds, it seems like the professor is asking questions to sort of get to a particular conclusion. And
That's just kind of a sneaky way of indoctrinating.
that's I was like, that's kind of what I was thinking. I was like,
I don't think that's what Socrates thought that he was up to.
I mean,
he talks about following the argument wherever it may lead. Now, you might say that he's full of it, and he's ironic and all, but there are times where it's clear at the end of the discussion, all they figured out was that they don't know what they're talking about. And so, in other words, he holds his cards back if he has them. So, I mean,
So an honest Socratic dialogue would be quite distinct then from professorial advocacy, tempered professorial advocacy.
I would think so, in that with tempered professorial advocacy, it's they don't necessarily intend for the students to reach the same conclusion as them, but to be capable of reaching a conclusion for themselves. I don't know if that answers your question, but okay. Dr. Trammell first? No, you're fine.
This is very interesting, and all of us who teach think about this, I think, a lot. How much of my view, if any, should get into the course and that kind of thing. I tended to make a big difference between seminars and other courses. Other courses I tend maybe to keep my views out of it more than you're suggesting, and you seem to agree with that in the general education. But then in seminars, it seems more appropriate for me to say something about what I think. And hopefully, at that point, you have students who understand that this is not an order to agree. Although students will always worry, and with justice, because this happens, that it may be very much easier to get a good grade and do well if your view is like the professor's, and if your whereas you may have to meet a much higher standard of argument if your view is not like the professors, and students do have that worry, and justly so, because it happens. Are you worried about that happening?
I think I had actually considered this, if what happens if you disagree with your professor's view, and I think that it's actually sort of a good thing, not necessarily to disagree, but to know that you disagree, because it will help you to be able to, to sort of adjust your response for that, if you're trying to argue for your position. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
So how do you, if you were a professor in college, how are you going to get all these, because I agree with this, but how are you going to get all your professors to know about this and to teach it that way?
I think
Is
actually,
there going to be a course?
that would be great.
And Miranda will teach it.
Actually, part of the reason that this personally really interested me was because I do want to be a college professor, and this is how I would want to teach. And I think, if you wanted other professors to, I think most professors have their own teaching style, and it would probably be hard to pull some of them away from that. I think maybe when people are, learning, like getting a teaching license or something, that would be just something you could insert, like, as a way of teaching. I don't
Quick question here. One of the complaints about the informed neutrality stuff was this sort of notion that, look, you can't pretend that all these points of view are equally reasonable, right? The Holocaust was wrong. That was not up for grabs, right? And it's wrong to sort of pretend neutrality and pretend like this might be something reasonable. But then in the discussion of the advocacy, the tempered advocacy stuff, several times that the content kind of is irrelevant because it's more of a modeling job. Right? Yeah. It's more of I will show you what it is like to defend an old position. See, to me, there's a little bit of tension there, because if the content really doesn't matter anyway, then why couldn't I have informed advocacy for the Holocaust anyway, or for how great it was, right? I mean, if the content really is irrelevant, it's all about just modeling what it is to defend an intellectual position, then why would that be a critique of informed neutrality, I guess?
maybe I downplayed it a little bit too much. The content is, it is somewhat relevant, and because I mean, you do need, I mean, if you're taking a course, you do need to understand content. But it's, as a way of teaching, it's more to model, like its goal is more to model a position, like model how to reach a position, and it's not necessarily trying to get them to students to reach a particular position. So I don't know if maybe I'm not understanding your question,
Well,
or
see, I could do this by advocating a palpably absurd position. I could do that. I could defend whatever you want me to defend. I'll defend it. I'll model, like, this is how we defend the position. And if that's the goal, then it seems that if that's one of the main pedagogical goals, then it seems that the complaints that one of the complaints about the informed neutrality stuff is that, well, it's making things seem reasonable that really aren't.
yeah.
I mean, it seems like that's not really a complaint if tempered advocacy isn't really so concerned with what I'm defending so much as how I'm defending it.
Okay. I'll be honest, I don't have an answer for you right now.
Yes, you do. You could tell me. You could say, no, one of the things you want to model is sincerity.
Seriousness about it.
Yeah, no bullshit here, that kind of thing, you know? And the point is that kind of a thing is bullshit, right? I mean, when you're bullshit in
I
front
think the
of
point
you.
would be is if anyone can,
Yeah.
I can pretend that anything is real and I can make you believe it. But if you're a professor, aren't you trying to tell us that you're not that?
Something like that.
I guess, yeah, that would be the case. I mean, as you wouldn't want to be, just randomly teaching some odd position that has no relevancy to the course, because, I mean, if the goal is to teach students how to be successful in this area, you don't want to give them wrong information or misrepresent any information or something like that.
Part of your goal is truth.
Yes.
And so,
Yeah, no, yeah.
if that's what you're concerned with, then you don't just get to make up a position for the
No, you
sake
can't
of
make up
it.
the
Yeah.
facts. That seems like some kind of like a moral advocacy. I mean, which isn't so much about the facts as
Can we talk a little bit about why I shouldn't try to indoctrinate my students? I was thinking about your arguments, and I'm not sure they're very strong. So I shouldn't indoctrinate people because why exactly should I avoid doing that? I mean, you've taken classes, you know I don't do that, but
Right.
why shouldn't I do that? If I'm convinced they're right, that I have the right answer on these truths or these questions, why shouldn't I, as a favor to you, try to impart that truth?
Part of trying to teach students how to be effective as professionals in their field is for them to be able to come to conclusions for themselves. And by just telling them what the conclusion is, or it makes them, first, it sort of, let me get this right in my head, it ignores that there's other positions that could be reasonably argued for. And it actually, it's a hit against student autonomy because they're not learning how to reach conclusions without just being told, here's what it is.
That could be a separate thing, right? I could teach you how to think, but I could also tell you that there are certain truths and these are part of it.
Like the FYI section of the course, every class.
I mean, in history, we don't shy away from teaching various facts, and if I'm convinced that these moral truths are facts, why should I leave those out?
Yeah, maybe I could save your soul,
Right.
or
I can help
make
you.
the country more reasonable by convincing you to vote in that.
I mean, this is why people do the indoctrination, because they're convinced that it's right, and they're convinced that they're doing something honorable. They're helping you discover truth.
See, I disagree that it's honorable. I think that it's
Truth isn't a good thing?
it's not that truth isn't a good thing, but that somebody trying to force their truth onto you is ignoring your, I personally find it like almost an offensive, it's like an offense against my intelligence, like I can't come to a conclusion for myself. Just trying to be told.
I'm protecting you from being misled by bad reasoning. So I'm helping you discover the truth.
Part of being able to discover the truth is maybe to reach a wrong conclusion for yourself once in a while and to learn from your mistake. So you can't ever learn from your mistakes if if you're always told what the truth is. And the truth can vary depending on who you are. You might have one truth, in your class, and then I could take a class from Dr. Drabkin, and he could say the complete opposite was true, if that was the case. I mean,
but earlier you were talking about, earlier you sort of said you don't want neutrality because that leads to this terrible thing of relativism, which seems to be sort of what you're embracing here a little bit, about the relativism of truth, and my truth is different than yours, and so forth.
I think what I'm trying to, it's not that I don't want people to be relative so much as, okay.
And we never disagree. No.
Never disagree. It's, okay. So it's not, so neutrality, it makes it, like you said, relative. And this position, yes, it is a form of trying to allow for other positions, other beliefs in a class. Hold on, could you say it again? Ask your question again, maybe? I think I'm getting lost in my words.
Well, just a question about the relativism. But let me just move to something else. Is there a way in principle to distinguish what I'm allowed to advocate for and what I'm not? Because presumably facts are okay to present. I don't have to give the non-factual side of things, and I don't have to give the view that the Civil War did not happen in the 19th century. But presumably some things you want to carve out as being things I can't advocate for directly. How do I decide what's what? Is it just that word controversial? If there's a debate about it, then I can't push it, but if there's not a debate, I can?
Okay. As far as facts go, in a math class, and I think I've written a lot of drafts since then, but I think in my original paper I had talked about this, that in classes like a math class where it's hard facts, that's not, it's not advocacy, and you can just do that. But in classes more of humanities courses, things like this.
I knew you were going to hit on us.
I'm all about the humanities. The truth is not a set truth. And so I think...
There's your relativism again.
Yeah. I'm getting caught by that, aren't I? But... Okay, I'm sorry, I'm really nervous.
I might pick up on that. One of the things you had considered in earlier drafts were how to weight whether you're going to emphasize the epistemic versus the pedagogical versus the moral, and you, especially in the presentation here, but somewhat in the paper have emphasized the pedagogical. But part of the challenge here, and part of the challenge of anybody who teaches anything controversial, is that the professor is also a moral being. And so the professor has not just her own ideas about what's right or wrong, but has a life in which they're affecting other people and students, and they're trying to do the right thing as well. And in the Frechette article, she talks very much about, the example she uses there is whether they should be teaching global warming in biology and other sorts of classes as an option, that you could believe in it or not, or is it just a fact? And one of the things she says is that, look, the state of the world is essentially at stake in the next few generations, and we don't have time to let students entertain wildly unrealistic theories, I guess. So this ties in with Carl's question about, is it just that it's controversial? Because that's controversial in a certain sense, but from a biological point of view, it's a fact.
There's a sense of urgency involved with that, where, like you said, with global warming, in the next few, and that'll be highly affected. That'll affect lots of people. The world, in the near future, where a truth about a religious truth or something like that. Maybe that's not a good example. But religious beliefs, some people maybe that wouldn't be as. It wouldn't affect your life as widespread as global warming, and it. I don't know.
They're hard questions and complicated.
Well, I was just let me maybe point out that, controversial could mean controversial, it can mean controversial in sort of a sociological sense, but then if the question is this controversial among experts? Like, this discussion of creationism, we get this rather silly, well, let's teach the controversy. It's like, there is no controversy in biology, it just ain't there. It's controversial in a purely sociological sense, but if it's a biology class, there is no controversy. Everyone agrees.
Yeah, or
this is
even less controversial is the Holocaust.
Yeah.
I mean, there are few things as well documented as that.
But is that what this pedagogy, or your
Temporary
professorial
professorial
advocacy?
advocacy?
Yes, thank you. Isn't that what the intent of that process is to get students or anybody to think those?
To understand that there is a controversy, particularly like it would be in between experts in an area of study, where you're just trying to understand that there are different beliefs and here's how you can reach a belief for yourself. But if it's purely if it's between different areas, I would think that it would probably be okay just to teach those positions.
Yeah, well, because it seems the criticism of the informed reality, the teach the controversy stuff with creationism, that would give the students totally the wrong idea.
Yeah.
If you did that, it would give them the false impression that biologists are actually wrangling about this.
When they don't.
So I can see the complaint then.
Okay.
I'm going to go back to your position and wonder if it can become a kind of sneaky kind of indoctrination. So you said I can't indoctrinate students. I'm trying to figure out a way I'm allowed to do that. So what I do is I present all these positions in a cheerful, they all sound good kind of way. And then at the end, I do my tempered professorial advocacy for one of them. And I belittle the others and show that they're ridiculous and all the flaws, and then I do. So why am I not allowed to do that? Or is it just that I lay them all out and say, this is the one I like, next subject? Or do I get to argue why that's the best? Because you said I'm modeling pedagogical technique. So what I could do is I can show why this one is so superior to all the others. It seems like that's consistent with your view, but it's a kind of indoctrination. Because if I do that well, everybody's going to agree that that's the right one, and all these others are crap.
With stating your view, you would give reasons why you find that to be, the case, but that doesn't mean that you need to totally say that these, like you said, belittle these other positions, because the whole point is to show that these are reasonable positions to have. It's just that these reasons for this position, I find them to be more supportive for that position or something.
Right, but I'm showing them why these others might be good.
See, I guess I'm saying that what I'm trying to say is that you wouldn't I don't know, maybe the word belittle threw it off for me. It seems like it's a little bit negative, like just saying that.
A real example would really help here, I suspect.
I have an idea. To use an example to convey this point. I thought your presentation today in this learning environment was tempered advocacy. You explained a couple different theories of teaching to people, like professional advocacy and pedagogy. And but you, in the end, concluded and promoted on your behalf
tempered
professorial advocacy. So in this scenario, and I think that this is, do you agree that you're using tempered TPA
yeah.
to promote TPA?
I've had a lot more time to practice saying that.
What would you have had to done in your presentation to have pushed what you're doing now to be some sort of soft indoctrination or indoctrination?
Yeah, in other words, what's going too far?
To use like Josh is saying, to say that, like, to make this sort of like indoctrination, I would have to have said that this is the best way, or not just the best way, but this is really the only way to teach properly in a classroom or something.
That is what you're saying.
You're
arguing that this is the right position, aren't you?
Not necessarily. Not in some courses. Like it's relative to the course. Not
right,
in.
You are defending that this is the right position in some courses, right?
But for some people, and I did sort of make that point that it's, and it is appropriate to use this, but you wouldn't use it like all day, every day in a class.
I really like that, this line of questioning. It's not the line I'm going to try to shift, but what's the difference between, could you distinguish between consciousness raising and indoctrination?
Sure. I'm just trying to make people aware of different beliefs. That's making them conscious that there is, trying to show that there is a controversy here, and here are, different positions that you can have. And I think, but indoctrinating would just be like, here's this position, and sort of ignoring these other positions.
Does this come down, it kind of seems to me that sort of circling this issue has come up before, just honesty. Is that maybe one of the hallmarks that would set this apart from indoctrination? Because the indoctrinator would sort of be pretending, but he knows bloody well or not so, that this is the only view that anybody has. And like, there's
some sort of deceit involved.
There's a deceit of a certain kind.
Maybe I should have highlighted that more in my representation in my essay, but there is a sort of deceit going on in indoctrination that tempered professorial advocacy wouldn't, or at least would eliminate.
You can certainly argue that tempered professorial TPA.
Everyone can just say TPA.
that TPA doesn't really increase the likelihood that someone will indoctrinate, since someone can indoctrinate personally while pretending neutrality, and I've seen that done. And maybe it's not even intentional on their part; they're just biased. So you can certainly argue that this doesn't really necessarily lead to more indoctrination.
Did you?
A question or two? I did have a question. Going back to your Socratic thing, that's kind of an interesting question to think about at this point. I think Socrates, mind you, they killed the guy, but I think he would argue that the method of question, answer, objection, and reply, following the arguments wherever they go, is applicable at every level of education. All the way back to elementary school, if there were such a thing allowed. That in any sort of situation, and this is what he would be advocating. Okay, he'd be advocating the power of reason to prod through trial and error, objection and reply towards the truth in the long run. I think he'd say that this is what you ought to always do. And even in the easy cases like arithmetic, you can give good objections to wrong answers. They're not very complicated, but in any sort of controversial thing at any level, you should always be demonstrating this. What do you think about that? Do you understand the nature of the question? So, see, in other words, Socrates, he would think that this is the golden key, you might say, that all should do, in all disciplines, at some level or another. Question, answer, objection, critical thinking, and so on. It's always appropriate to model that. Can you think of a case when that's not so? Where this is something that you sure don't want that, like history, and an introduction to history class, or you sure don't want to see any of that in an ethics class, or you don't want to see that in a biology class, principles of biology, question, answer, objection, reply. Ooh, I don't know. That's bad advocacy. Can you think of a single time when this is something you wouldn't want to do?
Mine or
speaking, Socratic approach, and why? What would be the reason?
Maybe where it would be. I can't necessarily think that would be necessarily wrong, but maybe if it were to get to a point where it would just confuse, like this question, answer, objection, reply, would sort of get the students lost in this question, And
So if you were too fast paced to handle the content?
maybe it would, like in a lower level course where they don't have like information, where students don't have proper information to really form, objection, argument, and all that, where they wouldn't have that information. Maybe it would be inappropriate then.
Can we talk about just again the practical? So Doug said I need an example. So let's say I present the various arguments for and against the abortion debate, and let's suppose I'm a pro-life defender, and so now I'm doing my tempered advocacy. So I'm going to go through those arguments and show why I have reached the conclusion that those are all bad arguments and that the pro-life position is good one. So we take the Jarvis article and I show why her analogy between the violence and the rape is not a good example, and I show why these various arguments, and then I show, and again, I'm upfront about it, it's not deceitful, so I say these are why I think that these arguments are really good, and I show, defend them against objections. Is that okay? Am I allowed to do that?
It seems reasonable to say that, to show that, okay, here's the positions that you can have. If I'm understanding what you're saying, that here's some positions that you can have. This is my position. Here's why I disagree with those, and here's why I agree with that. That's what you're trying to say, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's
perfectly okay.
That's what I'm saying.
However, but when you're being tested, is it fair for a professor then, or whatever, to assume that you should now hold their opinion?
No, and that's where
Correct.
it splits from tempered professorial advocacy,
But if I do this well enough, I can really make those positions look bad. And I can really give a lot of objections why I think these are really bad positions and why this is a really solid position. And it's not clear how that's that much different than indoctrination.
because you've already presented the views and given reasons why they're reasonable to believe. I mean, to start before saying your position, you'll have already presented.
Okay, so the indoctrinator never presents the alternatives.
Right.
That's the view.
That's the difference.
Okay, so nobody thinks that's a good position.
What if your audience or your students are oppressed? What if they are oppressed and there seems to be some urgency to teaching them how to advocate for themselves? Does that change this at all? Because I'm just sort of looking and I'm just sort of thinking, what if the audience or what if the students were members of an oppressed group? What would they need to get from the teacher? How could they learn to advocate?
I'm trying to think of where this would, like an example of this.
Like maybe a class in feminist thinking or something where all the students are from areas who've never heard of feminism, who think that women are lesser than men.
That's a good example, I think.
I never considered that actually. If they, that's sort of. Let me think for a second.
Another topic.
Yeah, no, it is. I was trying to think of. Yeah.
Well, I think it gets back though to the issue of the moral being of the professor, right? So if you see some way that you as a professor can alleviate immoral situations, you have to weigh that against the pedagogical goals and the truth.
Paulo Freire said you can't do that for them. It has to be something that is generated from within the individual to fight against their oppression or abuse.
And something that I sort of talked about more in my paper than I did in my presentation was that this type of advocacy it creates a classroom environment where students are free to be more open. So it would hopefully sort of counteract that oppressiveness.
Maybe that needs to be made really clear then, that in doing the advocacy, that part of the idea is that you'd be treasuring objections to it. That if anyone makes a reasonable objection to the person's view, it'll be articulated, clarified, improved upon, and cherished. I mean, if that were part of what you're but see, this is what's interesting, see, and I think maybe you were a little too neutral,
Okay.
or not too neutral, too generic
Okay.
in your presentation, in your paper, because it's as if in any discipline, you know, this is how they do the research there, this is how they do these. What Socrates would want to say is if you don't have that element, and that's essentially Socratic, where you're looking to, you're always looking for the strongest objective, always, and cherishing you. You run the risk of nasty indoctrination, actually. That would anyway, not, but that's the threat. But I mean, that would be you can turn anything into gold there, where you advocate your view, and then you spend all the next class examining why someone could reasonably object to your view. You know, something like that, and honoring that as well as you can. Boy, now that's something. You know.
Professor changing his or her mind.
Yeah, or at any rate, realizing that there's such a thing as a counterweight to their view. You know. Yeah, it's just valuable.
Maybe last
Oh,
comment, quick question.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed you phrased all this from the point of view of what the professor's up to. Do the students have to realize this is what's going on?
Part of a professor advocating in this way is for the students to understand that, okay, here are the positions, and this is where my professor sees it. So by doing it, they should just see this is what's going on. I mean, I would think. I think if it was properly being done, that it would be obvious.
Yeah, obviously, well done.
Yeah.
You said it sounds like that would just be a requirement for student autonomy, which, as you said, the only realm where this is appropriate to have professoral advocacy. So it's more like it's a requirement for student autonomy.
All right, well.